Good morning or good afternoon to all. I'm really pleased to open this second training session on biodiversity organized by IDFC and the working group on biodiversity of IDFC. I am Odile Canchou, working at IFD, the French Agency of Development, and I am the co-chair of this working group with Lydia von Krozig from the KfW, which is, and Lydia is also online. Perhaps allow me to say some words on IDFC for those who were perhaps new or who didn't participate to the first training session. IDFC, that's the International Development Finance Club. That's a group or club of 26 national and regional development banks from all over the world. We have banks from Asia, South America, Africa, and Europe. That's the largest provider of public development and climate finance globally. Our members, we all work together to implement the Sustainable Development Goals, the Paris Agreement for Climate, and the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework for the biodiversity. For that, we have 4 working groups, one on cooperation for development, another on gender equality, the third one on climate change, and our group on biodiversity with a very strange and complicated name, which is Making Finance Work for Nature, even if it's clear when you say that. So the 4 goals of these groups are to share knowledge and build the capacity. That's what we are doing today, for example, to align with international objectives. I mentioned that just before. We have a common agreement, for example, to apply the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework and align our financial flows with this framework. We want also to increase cooperation between members and to foster cooperation with other partners. So today, as I said just before, that's the second session of a series of 4 webinars on biodiversity. These sessions are based on a toolkit that has been developed by KfW and this working group with the help of Naomi Lawrence last year, I think. And the topic of 2 years ago, okay. The topic of today is to identify risk, impact, and dependencies, and also to see how to develop a biodiversity strategy. And the first one, that was the first session that we had for those who were not there, was more an introduction on what is biodiversity, the link between biodiversity and finance, why it is important, and also to present you the international context. And I think that it's online, Naomi, you will precise that afterwards. So now I'm giving the floor to Naomi, and Naomi will moderate this session today. Thank you, and have a good session.
Thank you, Odile. And yes, my name is Naomi Lawrence, and I work as a freelance biodiversity expert, mostly working for German Development and Financial Corporation, GIZ and KfW. And I mostly focus on all types of analyses and political advisory work regarding biodiversity conservation. And I've compiled most of the information that can be found in the IDFC's toolbox and will facilitate today's webinar, as Odile just said. And let me just introduce our other hosts and our other hosts and speakers. We have Antonin Dessus, who works for the IDFC Secretariat and is notably in charge of the biodiversity and climate working groups and will accompany the Q&A sessions later on. So if you have any questions, please feel free to post them in the chat and we will have some spots where we will try to answer them. Then we have Julien Callard, who is a research officer at the French Agency for Development, AFD, overseeing a research program on biodiversity and the development of a pro-nature economy. He has previously worked as a project supervisor for AFD and also the French Global Environment Facility in various sectors such as fisheries, agriculture, and biodiversity conservation, as well as on the development of banking and microfinance activities in various countries. Then we have Frida Arriaga from UNEP WCMC, the World Conservation Monitoring Center, where she's a program officer in the nature economy team. She works on an array of different projects, but mainly supports the Finance for Nature Focal Initiative, and in particular, the current updates of Encore, a tool which she will introduce to us today. And for those who haven't heard of it before, the name stands for Exploring Natural Capital Opportunities, Risks and Exposure. And Frida also works with banks, impact funds, and other financial institutions on taking nature risks and opportunities into account in their decision-making processes. And last but not least, we have Mauricio Velasquez, who has over 15 years of experience as principal executive in management of climate action and positive biodiversity in CAF, the Latin American and Caribbean Development Bank, where he coordinates CAF's initiative of key ecosystems in Latin America and the Caribbean, and has been head of the strategic program of environmental and social management for financial institutions. Since 2015, Mauricio has also been co-chair of the Latin America task force of UNEP FI, and then also a member of its global steering committee. And he's also got some real down-to-earth experience, for example, developing the Galapagos National Park management plan in 2004. So thanks for all of you for joining us. And before we dive into the webinar, maybe 2 words of housekeeping. I think all your mics are muted, and I would like you to keep it that way so we don't have any disturbing noises. But feel free to put your cameras on to create a bit more of an interactive feeling. The webinar will be recorded and put on IDFC's website and on YouTube, but without our faces, so don't worry if you don't want to be seen there. And also, if you could keep your phones nearby, as we will have some Slido questions to have some participatory elements, and there you can answer some questions using a barcode. Yeah, so let's have a look at today's agenda. As Odile said, at the last webinar, we discussed why impacts, risks, and dependencies should be measured and managed, both from a risk perspective, but also from a political point of view. And today we will focus more on the how to measure them, introducing step 2 of the toolbox's stepwise approach. Then Julien will introduce a report that could help you identify the right measurement tool, and Frida will introduce the Encore tool. And after this first part, we will have a short Q&A session. And after that, we will start looking at first aspects of how to manage risks and impacts by introducing biodiversity targets and or a strategy, which is step 3 of the IDFC's toolbox. And Mauricio will present CAF's BioCAF strategy in this session's part. And then again, we will have another short Q&A, and Lydia Frank-Rosig from KfW will close the session by introducing the next steps. So for those of you who haven't participated in the last webinar, IDFC's toolbox was developed in 2021, and it is a collection of ideas, reports, tools, and approaches aiming to assist IDFC members, but also others, in the integration of biodiversity into their operations and strategies. And at its heart, it suggests a stepwise approach, how to go about this integration. And you can see this on the right-hand side here, but I will also show it bit by bit in a minute. And of course, where an institution would start this process of integrating depends on where they are at. And also the steps could be rearranged. They can also be seen as different entry points that could be tackled in a different order. And in the toolbox for each step, we have included tools or approaches and related information. And every tool is sort of structured in the same way to provide a first overview, and then information where you can find out more about each tool. But let's look at the steps one by one. as we mentioned, step 1 we covered in the last webinar. It focuses on raising awareness for biodiversity and related risks and impacts in order to start the integration process and get high-level buy-in. And as Odile said, the recording is available on IDFC's website. Then we believe it's important to be able to quantify own impacts on biodiversity and the risks biodiversity loss could pose for your operations. So step 2 focuses on identifying dependencies, risks, impacts, and opportunities. And I will come back to this step in a minute. Then we have step 3, which focuses on the development of biodiversity targets and a strategy in order to outline how the current status could be improved. And in the toolbox, we actually cover AFD's biodiversity roadmap as an example. And today, as I said, Mauricio will present CAF's BioCAF strategy. And this could sort of be seen as the foundation of the whole process. Then most institutions will need some sort of capacity development to really get the process started. And the setting up a strategy and also capacity development could, of course, also be seen as management of risks and impacts. But in this step 5, we focus rather on the implementation of safeguards, using the mitigation hierarchy and such things in order to avoid or reduce biodiversity risks and impacts. And step 6 then looks at increasing biodiversity positive investments, for example, using nature-based solutions or green financial products. And we believe that all these management steps are really important. And there's a lot of talk about disclosure at the moment, which is also very important. But I think for the management, we also need these other steps. And webinar 3 will actually cover steps 4 to 6. Step 7 then focuses on the monitoring and reporting. So, for example, the GRI standards and TNFD reporting framework in order to increase transparency and to adapt processes and investments to further promote no net loss or net gain objectives. And finally, step 8 focuses on information and knowledge sharing with, for example, government partners and peers in order to engage others and to contribute to putting this topic high on the agenda. And steps 7 and 8 will be covered by webinar 4. And steps 4 to 8 could sort of be seen as the implementation of the stepwise approach. So looking at step 2, the purpose is being able to quantify risks of biodiversity loss for your institution as well as own impacts on biodiversity. And a figure I found quite alarming in a study by CDP, who analyzed more than 550 financial institutions, is that only 20% of these institutions actually measure exposure to nature-related risks. And this is compared to a figure of 85% who calculate climate risks. So we hope we can contribute a bit to changing this with the toolbox and the webinar series. And now let's have a look at the tools we included in the toolbox for step 1. They differ quite a lot in terms of scope, target user, and methodology. Some focus, for example, on footprint of an organization or an investment portfolio, while others rather aim to map impacts and dependencies on nature for a given sector. And the approaches also look at different levels, both in terms of biodiversity. So some look rather at the species level or habitat level, or some at ecosystem services. And also in terms of geography, some look more at the site level and others look at the aggregate global level. And in the toolbox, we actually included 2 footprinting tools, the BFFI and the GBS, which stand for Biodiversity Footprint for Financial Institutions, and the Global Biodiversity Score. And both tools can be used for an analysis at various levels, from portfolio down to project level. And they both focus on species as a characteristic for the intactness of ecosystems. A major difference between them is that BFFI is an open source tool, whereas GBS is a commercial tool. And they also are based on different models for their calculations. Then we included the Integrated Biodiversity Assessment Tool, IBAT, which I'm sure some of you know, which is a web-based commercial risk mapping tool and a source of data. And it actually allows a first assessment of how a development in or near a site may conflict with biodiversity conservation goals. So it focuses at the site level and on habitat and species. Then we included biodiversity inclusive impact assessments, which can be undertaken within the framework of environmental and social impact assessments, which I'm sure a lot of your institutions already apply. And as the name suggests, this looks more at the impact side of things. They are mostly undertaken at the project level and often have a focus on habitat or species. As I said, the Encore tool is also included in the toolbox, but since this will be introduced in a bit more depth later on, I will skip this here. Just wanted to have it in there as a matter of completeness. And in the toolbox, we have collected some more information about each tool. But if you want to dive a bit deeper, Julien Callat from AFD will now introduce to you a report that you might find helpful when choosing the right measurement tool. So Julien, you have the word.
Thank you, Naomi. So thank you everyone for inviting me. Nice to see a lot of people today. I want just to perhaps to share the work that we have published recently this year. I don't know if I can move you're moving the presentation for me, Naomi? Yeah, okay. So what I will present is really a work which is extracted from a study that we implemented with the EBRD to prepare a comparative analysis of 6 biodiversity metrics. These metrics are particularly relevant to the locate and evaluate steps of the TNFD LEAP approach, if you know it, the new framework to report on financial risk related to nature. And this is why we decided to try to implement this study. I insist on the fact that we try, and I'm still struggling to build together the study itself that will be implemented in 2024 to compare these different metrics. Most of these metrics have individual case studies. This is a single metrics have been applied to a single object of observation, a project or company, but we don't have at the moment any study to compare this on the same site or project the different metrics in order to analyze both the differences in results, sensitivity, as well as cost and accessibility. So one main takeaway of the study where you have this main result on the screen is to see that in fact, depending on the metrics that you can use, that you can choose, in fact, depending on your needs, you can consider to have 2 main approach for testing the metrics. A high-level assessment, which is a rapid ex-ante assessment that provides general guidance on the relative importance of project in terms of nature, impact or dependencies, risk and opportunities. Usually you use very, very basic information like, you know, the level of investment, the amount of investment, the sector, the localization, very broad localization. And then you have the opportunity to do an in-depth assessment, which is more detailed and can be ex-post assessment also, which is time and budget intensive and which aims to provide project-specific results based on precise location of operation, information about supplies, purchase, through the value chain, and pressure on nature. So this is very intensive because you use water and energy consumptions, pollution emission to atmosphere and water. You can use also raw material purchase and waste produced by the project or the company. So it's really, really data intensive. And this is why you have to choose on the level of assessment that you want to do. The main also result of this study is to provide you the vision of how you can use these different metrics. Again, the report is available on the EFD website. These metrics, anyway, are more appropriate to inform initial screening, but it should be followed by a spatially explicit and company-specific assessment to inform on location-specific dependencies and impact. So this is really, don't expect to have, a precise, definitive, assessment of the impact with that kind of tools. But it's really interesting for, global screening of your activities. What you have on the screen here is the different, ways to use them. So you see that you have metrics who are more adapted for site-based assessment, and they deliver different, indicators of results. This is mainly ABCMAP and the STAR metric. Both are described in the report. Then you have more site and sector-based metrics, and some of them are value chain-based assessments. This is the GBS, the CBF, and the BFFI that Naomi start to present it for BFFI and GBS. And then you have Anchor, who can tell you also that kind of information on a broader scale. And then you have the sector-based assessment, and using Anchor, and we are very much using Anchor at the moment, particularly for the dependencies aspect of activity to nature-related risk. But I leave, my colleague to present in more detail the Anchor tool. So I will not go into the detail on that. So essentially, STAR is the only metric that estimates exposure to species extinction risk, whilst ABCMAP is specific to agriculture, forest, and other land use, mainly the AFOLU sectors, and is more dedicated to that. And it is the only metric that estimates ex ante and ex post impact of land use. It incorporates change in management practices, and so on. And GBS, CBS, CBF, and BFFI are value chain metrics, as I said. And then in the report, as Naomi is showing here, you can find two main, decision trees, either for portfolio or either for project companies assessments. And this kind of decision tree can help you to choose the best adapted metrics for your needs. That's the main things that you will find in the report at the moment. I hope.
Okay, thank you very much for this interesting reference, Julien. So is the study supposed to be the real study is supposed to be published next year, or will it be implemented and then published at a later point in time?
Yeah, hopefully we will implement in 2024 and just published after, so probably end of 2024 or possibly later in 2025.
Okay, but I think these preliminary findings are already quite interesting when someone wants more information on each tool. So thank you very much. And now, before we look into the Anchor tool in a bit more depth, we would like to know from the audience what your experience, if you have any, are with measurement tools. So if you could please pick up your phones and scan this barcode on the left-hand side. This will directly lead you to our first Slido question without having to install anything. And the first question is, which tools or methods is your institution, company, or organization using to identify biodiversity-related dependencies, risks, impacts, and/or opportunities? And please feel free to scroll down as not all options are shown, or do I have to? And also you can choose various options, so you can tick more than one option. Sorry. I have to scroll down, don't manage. But I think the tools that are chosen most are on top of the page. So quite interesting. Encore seems to be known the most by 46% of participants. Followed by biodiversity inclusive impact assessments, the IBAT tool, none. Okay, there's still numbers coming in. So no one for footprinting. Now the none is overtaking. But still quite a few people have used the Encore tool, but I'm sure, Frida, now you have a chance to convince some more people how to use the Encore tool. So you can keep voting and we can see at the end the rest of the results. And we'll have the question later on. So Frida, thanks for joining us, and I'm very interested in hearing from you about the Encore tool. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Naomi. Well, happy to be here talking to the International Development Finance Club. It's a pleasure to be speaking to you all. So my name is Frida Arriaga, as Naomi mentioned. I'm a program officer in the UNEP WCMC, and this is an organization that is part of the UN system, for those of you who don't know. And we work on biodiversity and nature's contribution to society and the economy. So we have this mandate to support the interface between policy and science, and as a result, we work with an array of different stakeholders and decision makers. So I'll be introducing Encore, although I know some of you already are very familiar with the tool, but happy to answer any question that may arise. So the agenda for this short presentation is the following. I'll give an overview of Encore that includes both the natural capital module and the biodiversity module. I'll talk about the inputs needed to use the tool, and also I'll briefly touch upon the future developments and things that we are currently working while we are updating Encore, and things that you can expect in the following months as well. And if we have time, I can give an example of navigation within the tool. So if we go to the next slide, please, Naomi. Here you can see Encore's vision and mission. And financial institutions are, we all know, exposed to natural capital risks that in turn affects businesses that they lend to or invest in. So to assist the financial institutions in carrying out the natural capital assessments, the Encore partners, which are UNEP FI, Global Canopy, and of course UNEP WCMC, they partner to create Encore. And I would like to highlight here something about the Encore's mission, which is helping economic actors to take the first steps to understand the impacts and dependencies. So Encore is very much a screening tool and a foundation upon which other further analysis can carry on. So as it's been mentioned already, Encore stands for Exploring Natural Capital Opportunities, Risk, and Exposure. And in the next slide, we can see the landing page of what it looks like when you start looking at the web page. So this is a web-based tool. It was launched in 2018, and Encore was developed with the finance sector in mind. So we have the primarily audience of the financial sector, but of course, that doesn't mean that other audiences cannot use the information that is displayed and contained within OnCore. So OnCore helps to understand the links between economic activities and nature, and mainly allows the financial institutions to understand, first of all, how the businesses in their portfolio depend on nature and how material are these dependencies. Second, it helps financial institutions to understand how does the environmental change is affecting the ability of ecosystem services to provide the services on which the businesses depend on. And thirdly, OnCore helps understanding what drivers of environmental change, and this could be things like climate change or pollution, how these drivers of environmental change have the greatest impact on the businesses that are part of your portfolio. So OnCore is synthesizing a large body of natural capital literature and research. And if we go to the next slide, we can see a snapshot of the information that underpins OnCore. So that one. Thank you, Naomi. So the knowledge base in which OnCore stands is very robust because, as I said, it summarizes a large body of literature on natural capital. So if we start from the top of this pyramid, we can see sectors and, like the economic activities that are classified into sectors, and these are drawn from GICS, the Global Industry Classification System. And this could include things like energy or healthcare or materials, etc. So sectors in GICS go into sub-industries as a further level of detail. And just to give an example, one sub-industry would be, for example, agricultural products. However, in OnCore, these sub-industries were further broken down into production processes. So each sub-industry of GICS in OnCore has between 1 and 9 processes or production processes. And for example, in the case of agricultural products, a production process could be aquaculture, or it could be large-scale arable crops. So as you can see, it's a bit more detail on the economic activities. So OnCore connects the economy of all sectors with nature, and that's with the ecosystem services. So if we go into the pyramid, you can see ecosystem services, which I mean benefits that people and the economy obtain from nature. And these are drawn from the Common International Classification of Ecosystem Services. And these could be things like pollination or erosion control or climate regulation. And these ecosystem services are in turn underpinned by natural capital assets, which could be species, water, habitats. You can see all laid here in the slide. And these natural capital assets could be changed or triggered by drivers of environmental change. And in OnCore, we have 27 drivers, which are, as I said, these factors that triggers the change in the status of natural capital assets. And this could be natural, such as storms, fires, earthquakes, but they can also be anthropogenic. So, for example, overfishing or intensive agriculture, for instance. The drivers of environmental change are then also linked to impact drivers, which are directly connected with the economic activities, with the production processes. And you can see here in this slide the same components, but how they are interconnected. And in this diagram, we can see the links and qualifiers between all of these components. And you can see clearly the pathway for the dependencies at the top in yellow and the pathway for the impact side on red at the bottom of the slide. So if we look really quickly at the dependency side, this looks at the relevance of natural capital assets to the provision of ecosystem services. And in turn, this gives a rating on how material is the dependency of this production process on the ecosystem service. And for the impact side, really quickly, we see that what is the materiality rating of the production process towards impact drivers, and then how in turn affects the drivers of environmental change, which have an influence on specific natural capital assets. And as you can see, this is it could be a feedback loop for certain economic activities. And all of this was developed on desk-based review of literature and research, and it also underwent an expert review process. So this, as I said, was a very thorough research process. Something that I wanted to point out, if we go to the next slide, is that OnCore also contains spatial data for natural capital assets, but also for impact drivers. So if you have information about the location of the investments in your portfolio, you could use this feature of OnCore to give you an idea of the risks associated to locations. So for example, you can select from the list of ecosystem services, and it will display the natural capital assets associated to that service and the layers that you can access to. So for instance, let's say that you're interested in the ecosystem service of bioremediation, and then it will show you the natural capital assets associated, which it could be a habitat, for example. So in this feature of OnCore, it will display a layer of habitat intactness, and you could see in which locations it is more severe or not. And it also has this feature that is in the slide, which is hotspots, where you can explore natural capital hotspots layers according to terrestrial or marine ecosystems. So that's, in a nutshell, the natural capital module. But OnCore also has another module, which is the biodiversity module. So if we go to the next slides, this module is mainly designed for financial institutions to better align their activities with biodiversity goals. And this could be through the management and engagement practices that they have for nature. So this is the landing page of the biodiversity module. And if you go to the next slide, you can see how the results are displayed. So in the biodiversity module, this focuses mainly on agriculture and mining. This is because these two sectors are priority sectors, and because they both have highly material impacts on nature. So these were selected as priority sectors to begin the biodiversity model. So you can just use this module only on one of these two sectors. So this module, as I said, aims to help financial institutions work towards the understanding of their biodiversity impacts. So this is not related to nature, but rather biodiversity. And for that, we have two metrics, which are the STAR metric and the ecological integrity risk. So STAR focuses on the potential of reducing the species extinction risk. And these two metrics were selected because of their relevance in the Convention of Biological Diversity, Kunming-Montreal framework. So what the module helps with is basically understanding the portfolio potential to reduce the species extinction risks and ecological integrity risk, but also it helps pave the way, the pathway for positive impacts within your agriculture and or mining portfolio. And it provides at the end of the bottom of the land page, it provides guidance on strategies that financial institutions can undertake in order for them to contribute towards the biodiversity goals, the international biodiversity goals. So in terms of what inputs are needed to use OnCore and to better undertake the tool, if we go to the next slide, for the natural capital use, you just basically need to select through the filters the sector that you're interested in, the sub-industries that you want to analyze, and the production processes that you want the information to come at. So basically, there's no information or extra data that you need to input for the natural capital module. For the biodiversity module, however, you do need a bit more of information about the portfolio. So in the case of the mining sector, you will need to input the name of the companies that you are interested in looking at, plus the countries that they are currently working in. And in the case of agriculture, we don't have that level of detail. It's a bit more global. So in agriculture, you have two options. You could either input the countries that you are currently working in and the cropland or pasture land area, and that's in hectares. So for example, you could input 10,000 hectares in Brazil, and then the information will come out. Or the other option, if you don't have information about the general area or the hectares, then you could provide the country and the details of turnovers, and that it's in millions of dollars. So you could choose one of those two options. Alternatively, OnCore also allows you to upload the portfolio data in CSV format, so you don't have to input it manually. So that's something to consider as well. So how can, if we go to the next slide, I just wanted to put in a slide, how can OnCore be of use for development banks? And these are a few ideas. So first of all, OnCore could be used to help people understand the key ecosystem services and impact drivers. It could also provide prioritization of activities, and that could be in terms of key economic sectors or key companies that a portfolio needs to be focusing on. OnCore can also be very helpful in supporting the due diligence phase of a new investment. And it can also help in setting organization-wide strategies or identifying some safeguards to assure risks are taken into account, especially, obviously, natural capital risks. And so understanding the dependencies and impacts on natural capital can definitely help strengthen the risk management processes and the analysis of investments and loans and other financial mechanisms. So in terms of the future developments and how are we undertaking the updates of OnCore, we are currently working on several lanes to update the tool in the next few months. So first of all is the industry classification. So as I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, OnCore is based on GIGS, and we are changing it to ISIC, which is the International Standard Industrial Classification of all economic activities. And we are changing it for several reasons, but one of the most important ones is because it is widely and internationally used. And it also provides more granularity in terms of the economic activities. So to give you an example of this, in current OnCore, with the production processes, we have around 81 production processes, different production processes within the sectors. And in ISIC, we will have 270 economic activities. And as you can see, this huge leap will allow users to identify themselves better and therefore to have more detailed information regarding their dependencies and impacts that is tailored to their specific economic activity. So that's one of the changes that we are doing. Another change is that we are adding the value chain view. So currently Encore focuses on direct dependencies and direct impacts. If you go into the tool, you will only be able to see the direct dependencies and impacts related to the economic activity that you are currently looking at. But we are working towards having this view of indirect impacts and indirect dependencies. So you will be able to see both indirect and direct impacts from the companies in your portfolio, well, sectors in your portfolio. And materiality ratings. So currently Encore has qualitative materiality ratings, and we are working towards making some of the ratings be based in quantitative data, as well as long as we have enough research to do so. And that also updates include provision of case studies, training materials, in-tool analysis, and all sorts of different updates which will be happening in the first quarter of 2024. And just to give an example of case studies, yesterday we released a case studies with Robeco, which is an international asset management organization based in the Netherlands. And Robeco used Encore for screening their nature-related risks at the portfolio level. So I can drop that in the chat if you want to have a look. But it's really interesting how Encore has been used by different financial institutions around the world. And this is just one example that is the most recent example since it was released yesterday. So I'm aware of the time constraints, so I think I'll leave it at here, so we can have questions. But I'll also drop my email in the chat, so you all can have it as well if you have further questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think on the last slide we also have your email, but yeah, if you could post it in the chat, that would be great. And also thanks for this great overview and also your thoughts put into how the members of IDFC and other development banks could make use of Encore. I think that's very helpful. And since there are currently no questions in the chat, I have one quick one, but then we also need to continue. You mentioned that the biodiversity module first only looks at mining and agriculture. Are there any other sectors planned to be included, and which ones?
Yeah, so we are very aware that we need to update that part. However, we're looking for funding to do so. But right now, there are no concrete plans to update the module any further. That's
okay.
Specific module. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much. I think if there are any other questions from the audience, still feel free to post them in the chat, and we will have another short Q&A session at the end, and we can also answer questions on Encore. But now let's leave the measurement side and start turning to the first aspects of how risks and impacts can be managed. In the report I mentioned earlier by CDP, they also found that 30% of financial institutions integrate biodiversity-related issues into their strategies. So that's 10% more than those measuring exposure, but again, the figure is much lower than that compared to integrating climate, which is done by 95% of financial institutions analyzed. So to start with step 3, we believe that setting targets and introducing a biodiversity strategy is very vital for the long-term anchoring of biodiversity conservation into strategic processes. It can create commitment in the senior management, lead to continuously reducing negative impacts on biodiversity and increasing positive impacts, and also better management of biodiversity-related financial risk. And today we actually decided to focus more on the strategy part, but in the toolbox you can also find some more information on target setting. So if you're interested in that, it might be interesting for you to check out the Science-Based Targets Network, which also introduces a stepwise approach to target setting. And the first science-based targets for nature were launched in May this year. And the current focus of the network is actually on companies, but I think the targets and guidance are also applicable for financial institutions. And there will also be additional guidance for financial institutions. There's quite a comprehensive website, which I have included the link to, and also a lot of documents that can guide you through the process. And looking at a biodiversity strategy, I think as always, it's best to learn from a practical example. But before Mauricio will introduce the BioCAF strategy, just some general words. So biodiversity strategies can help capture biodiversity conservation in strategic processes in order to reduce risks and negative impacts and aim for positive impacts. It's like most strategies usually focuses at the institutional level, and the focus can be chosen as suitable. And now we would again like to know from you whether you have any experience with target setting or developing a biodiversity strategy. So if you could please also answer this question. I think you don't necessarily need to scan the barcode again if you still have the site open, and otherwise the barcode is on the left-hand side again. So the question is, does your institution have a biodiversity strategy and or biodiversity targets? And again, you can also choose multiple options, as I'm sure some of the biodiversity strategy will also have some targets within. Okay, so it's about 50-50, the participants having a biodiversity strategy or not. So I hope our next input can share some light on how one can go about the development of a strategy and what could be included within it. So Mauricio, thanks for joining us, and the floor is yours.
Thanks a lot for inviting me. Well, I'm going to present our strategy in biodiversity. It's, well, I have to say that it's not the first one. Actually, this is the we have in CAF. Can we go to the next slide, please? Okay. When CAF was founded more than 50 years ago, we decided to do two things: sustainable development and regional integration. And part of sustainable development is to have healthy biodiversity. And basically, Latin America is a very rich country in biodiversity, with 6 of the 17 megadiversity countries. Well, lots of wetlands, and 25% of the cover of the most biodiverse forest, between others. The economic value of the ecosystem is very high. It's like $24 trillion per year. And next, so we decided to make biodiversity cross-cutting issue in the institution. And next slide, please, Naomi. And so we try to also to work with the different business areas of CAP, the presidencies, directorates, etc., and also with our clients and academics and civil society organization. We wanted to have more equitable development model based on the principle of the conservation of biodiversity, and also we understand that biodiversity and climate action are together, are basically the same sides of a coin. So we started to hire a team that, next slide please, that helped us to develop the strategy and to develop an internal process of conversation and also conversation with the external clients. If I have to outline the strategy of BioCAF, we will have 5 components. One is biodiversity in the landscapes at the food value chain, and secondly, we have biodiversity in productivity and competitiveness, and we have another component in biodiversity and financial systems, in which we as a development bank try to work in 2 things, reducing the risk, measuring and reducing the risk, negative impacts in our activities and the activities of our clients, some of them financial intermediaries, and also to increase positive impact, biodiversity positive impacts in our operations and the operations of our clients. Besides, we have besides these areas of work, we decided to have a cross-cutting area of key ecosystems. The Amazon region is one of them, but there are, at the beginning, 10 strategic ecosystems or key ecosystems, such as the tropical Andes and the Mesoamerican Reef Barrier, Tumbesian and Choco forest. This is an ecosystem, for example, in which agriculture has been the main driver of deforestation, and we are dealing with remnants of 95% of the original biomes in Ecuador and Peru, for example. So we try to decide and choose some performance indicators that were at the beginning simple to measure for us, but at the same time that can have and show significant performance development over time. And so one of them is volume and effectiveness of implemented projects. The other is volume of finance or financial mobilization on restoration, conservation, and sustainable use of biodiversity. And the number of green operations with positive impacts on biodiversity. But each one of the 5 components of the biodiversity strategy, they have a key performance indicator. Next, please. So how we did it? Well, I mentioned before, we work with several parts and several people from different areas of CAP, from cities, building capacity, social issues, risk that the Vice Presidency of risk, infrastructure, etc. And then also we made consultations of our documents with several civil society organizations and regional and local universities. After that, we put together a document that we presented last year in Montreal at the COP15. And we also have received several comments from people after that meeting. Next slide, please. So the biodiversity strategy has developed interesting support internally, and as you can see in this slide, this is our new institutional strategy of CAF. So all the areas have to follow at least the first 5 missions over there that are energy just transition, biodiversity and ecosystem services, resilient territories, social inclusiveness, infrastructure, and internalization of productivity. So what I want to say is that all the business areas have to follow and report right now how their projects are making some impacts and reducing negative impacts and making positive biodiversity impacts in the ecosystems that we mentioned before, and also in biodiversity. So the biodiversity strategy has been adopted in general strategy of CAF, a business strategy, and also we are having more work because we have to make a lot of alignment with all the business areas of CAF and giving them some inputs on how they can make a greener projects and projects with a more positive biodiversity actions and goals. Next, please. Next. Okay, so basically the institution is trying also to make some contribution to the global goal of positive biodiversity to the 2030. And we are having some, we're going to have some annual reports of biodiversity contribution, besides the reports of green finance and biodiversity finance that we are presenting here in the IDFC since 2014. Next, please. And next, okay. Yes, here is a slide with some of the impact indicators that we are using. Some of them are also similar or inspired in global environmental benefits that are used by Jeff, but some of them are also developed during this task of creation of BioCAF 2022 and 2026. And there are also others that are more specific for each of the 5 components of the strategy. Next, please. The general objective of our biodiversity strategy is to have 40% of green finance at 2026, and at least from that 10% of biodiversity finance in CAF investments. Next. And these are the 5 areas that I mentioned, the 5 components of BioCAF. The first one is biodiversity and competitiveness with a medium size and small enterprises. The second is biodiversity and sustainable cluster and productive landscapes. The third is biodiversity and blue economy. We developed a specific strategy for blue economy. And right now also we are leading with FAO an integrated program of the JEF on ocean health. And the other 2 components are biodiversity and sustainable cities and biodiversity and finance. Next, please. This is the theory of change. I don't want to get deep into explanation of this, but some of the main outcomes that we want to achieve until 2026 are to increase the mobilization of internal and external resources through incrementing the number of programs and projects on biodiversity, avoid biodiversity loss, and promote generation of an exchange of knowledge and collaboration with the strategic partners. Next, please. So, well, basically, this is a quick presentation that I put here for sharing with you. And if I don't know if you have some questions, please.
I think in the chat there are none regarding the strategy so far, but I have one quick question. What would be your major advice to other colleagues from PDBs who want to start the process of developing a biodiversity strategy?
Sure. Well, I will mention that first of all, I will advise you to have a good participation process, a good internal participation process at the beginning, and to create some alignment with your clients, and perhaps everything starts with a a nice and a simple exercise of systematization of what you have made before. Sometimes you have had as a bank, as a financial institution, a lot of work with different projects and operations, but you have to look inside and put a nice document that can help you to have a baseline, and then to that can allow you to set some targets and goals. In the next slide is the link to our strategy in the web. So if you are interested in knowing more about it, you can find it there. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thanks a lot for this overview of the strategy. So if you are thinking of developing a strategy, I think it's very worthwhile to check out the document and also AFD's roadmap. And in the toolbox, we also included some principles or good practices to adhere to in this process. For example, having a member of senior management who's personally responsible for the implementation of a strategy in order to have real momentum in this process. But with this, I would quickly hand over to Antonin if there's any questions in the chat.
Yes, thank you, Naomi.
Maybe also regarding the first input.
Yeah, we have a couple of questions for Frida, especially on the geographic scope of Anchor. Does Anchor as a universal application across location and geographic regions? And this was a question from Musa, and we also have a question of Henry on this. Would this tool work for a small country like Belize? So maybe you can answer this first question, and then we have a last one on explaining in more detail how Anchor is developing, how you are developing Anchor's materiality ratings. Thanks a lot, Frida.
Yeah, sure. So in terms of the application across different countries, so in the biodiversity model, which was the example I gave with Brazil, you can put any country at all. So there's no limitation on small or big countries. In terms of information from actual countries regarding specific locations, so we don't have that because Anchor is a global tool. So all the assessments and information that are part of the knowledge base are universal. So we don't have a specific features for countries. So I hope that answers that question. And in terms of the materiality ratings, so in Anchor, materiality ratings represent the potential importance of ecosystem services to economic activities and the potential importance of impacts of a production process on nature. So as I mentioned, Anchor currently has qualitative materiality ratings. So these go from very low to very high. And these rely on peer-reviewed literature. So basically the research that was made in the desk-based research. And in dependencies, it is calculated considering, first of all, how significant is the loss of functionality if the ecosystem service is disrupted, and how significant is the financial loss due to the loss of functionality of the ecosystem service. So that's in the dependency side. And in the impact side, it considers three aspects. So it's how frequent does the impact occur? How quickly might the impact start to affect natural capital? and how severe is the impact. So all of those are considerations that go into the rating of from very low to very high. And what I mentioned is that we're working on putting quantitative data behind that, not only qualitative data. And in the update that we are currently undertaking, we are proposing to attribute indicator values through indicators available in datasets from environmental input-output models that analyze global supply chains. So that information available will be helpful to produce certain quantitative ratings, not for all of them, but for some of the pressures and dependencies.
Thank you very much, Frida. I think we are done with the questions. So.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Thanks, Antonin, as well. So thanks to our speakers and the audience for your participation. And sorry for running a little late. For some closing words, I will now hand over to Lydia von Krosek from KfW, who will provide a short overview of the next steps. So hope to see you at the next webinar. Thank you and bye-bye from my side.
Yes, thank you also from IDFC side to the presenters for these inspiring presentations and discussions on this, on step 2 and step 3. And yeah, this is now halftime. We have had 2 webinars and 2 more are coming. The next one is on the 10th of November at 1:30 Central European Time. And that will be covering step 4, 5, and 6, which is capacity building, quite fitting. So this could be part of your capacity building also in your company. That means you can send on the invitation that you receive from Antonin further to colleagues and so on. You're most welcome to. And part of the next webinar will be also managing risks and impacts and increasing biodiversity policy investments, which is where you learn and hear about examples of financing instruments into biodiversity. And so already teaser of the 4th seminar, and that will be on the 22nd of November, also at 1:30, and then focusing on the last 2 steps, 7 and 8. Good. And with this said, please, Antonin, how does it work? You will send out the invitations to all the IDFC members and whom you have on the list. Yes. And as we said, you can forward it to other colleagues and people who you might be interested in it. Good. Then we wish you a good afternoon or a good day wherever you are, and bye-bye until next time.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you very much.